Our guests in this segment have been here before from West Virginia Birth to 3, and that would be Nicole Sergent. Nicole, good morning. Thank you for coming in.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having us back.
It's a great pleasure having you back. Sandy Knoerlein is here too. Sandy, welcome back.
Thank you much.
And we have a parent who will join us via phone in a little bit, but first and foremost, we want to get some of the informational stuff out right away too. And you can give us once again the mission of what West Virginia Birth to 3 does and some of the services that you provide.
Absolutely.
Go right ahead, Nicole.
So I'm a physical therapist. Sandy is an occupational therapist. We both participate as contractors with West Virginia Birth to 3. Our program is a part of IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Mm-hmm. We fall under Part C of that act. Every state in the United States is required federally to provide support to infants and toddlers with disabilities and developmental delays, and West Virginia does that through West Virginia Birth to 3. We primarily do that through in-home visitation and a coaching model where we are teaching and empowering parents to promote their child's development. We provide a variety of services. We have specialists that include physical, occupational, and speech therapies, social worker, dietitian, nursing,
vision and hearing specialists,
psychologist, service coordinators that help connect families to resources. And so we do that from whenever a child is referred to our program until they no longer need us or until they turn 3 years old.
And are you a state employee?
We are not. We are all contractors. There are 700 providers, about a little bit more, across the state. We serve children in all 55 counties. And there are Birth to 3 employees that work in the administrative side throughout the state that help get those kids to us, and plan for our program. But the majority, all of us that are in the homes doing the work, are contractors.
And how many children do you service in a given year?
I currently have about 73 kids on my caseload between myself and my OT assistant.
And how often are you expected to see those 73 children?
It varies. I have some kids that I see weekly, some twice a month, some once a month, some I see quarterly.
And how many contractors/employees do you have in the Eastern Panhandle?
I don't know an exact number. I can tell you for physical therapy specifically, we have the equivalent of about 2 full-time therapists for all of Berkeley and all of Jefferson. We particularly in this area have been, and we'll talk about why, but we have been bleeding practitioners in the past few years. And so we have become as busy as we can possibly be to serve as many families. I think it's also important to note that right now we're serving over 13% of the infants and toddlers in the state who are 0 to 3, and that is over 7,000 children.
What happens to those children once they age out?
Well, some of them no longer need support services, so some of them don't need anything. If they do still need support, they have the option of receiving special education services through the pre-K system, special needs pre-K at 3 and universal pre-K at 4, and then the public school system after that.
And who pays you, and how does that work?
So we bill directly to the state. And then they, through their third-party payer, we're reimbursed for that time. And our funding comes through the Department of Health.
Yes, we are paid
we're funded through, I guess that fund comes from the state funds, some federal funds, and some Medicaid funds.
Okay. And how do you get paid? What's the formula for reimbursement? Do you get paid for an 8-hour day or per child, or how does it work?
We get paid per face-to-face billable hour. So direct time that we are with the family, we bill by the unit, so every 15-minute unit. We do not get paid for our travel time. We do not get paid for mileage reimbursement. We do not get paid for documentation time. We do not get paid for consultation with physicians, ordering equipment, any of those outside non-direct service time.
Answering phone calls and texts, delivering equipment. And out of that rate, we are expected to provide our own insurance, retirement, testing supplies, technology, continuing education, licensing fees, among a lot of other expenses that we need just to do our jobs.
Well, I would presume since all the rest of that comes out of your pocket that your reimbursement rate increases on a regular basis?
It has not increased in 22 years. Our last reimbursement rate was 2003.
So 22 years you've been working on the same reimbursement rate.
Yes.
I think we learned that the last time that you were here
Yes,
too,
yes.
did we not?
We don't know if there's anyone else in the state of West Virginia who hasn't had a raise in 22 years.
Why do you keep doing this? Goodness.
Well,
Who would do this 22 years without a raise?
I mean, it's a fair question. I will say, and I'm sure Sandy has her own answer, I would argue that we have the best job in the world. Not only do we get to see children make incredible progress in the time period of their life where biologically they have the largest ability to create change at a brain level, and that lasts them for their whole life. And nothing's more rewarding than that. But when you're in someone's home frequently for 3 years, you become part of their family. You become part of their community. They trust you. And it's very rewarding, and it's very fulfilling. And we care about the kids that we serve because we know the difference that it makes. But that does get harder when those expenses we need to do our job go up. We're basically taking a pay cut. And so we've had a mass exodus here in the Panhandle of people who don't want to leave, but they don't have a choice.
Mr. Gilstrap.
How much of what what you do is actually parent training? Like when we took our puppy to get trained, the puppy's not trained. The owners are trained, right? So you got
Right.
you got a newborn to 3-year-old. So is it really about helping the parents cope with issues?
Absolutely, because so let's say the most frequently we go into a home is once a week for about an hour. 4 hours a month does not equate to long-term change. But if we can teach that parent, you know, when you're bathing your child, do this. When you're sitting at mealtime, do this. When you're holding them, do this. Arguably all the hours of the day that the parent is caring for that child becomes therapy. And that's where you see that difference, where you really see huge, I mean, miraculous leaps and bounds. I always say, I wish I could carry around a camera, but HIPAA doesn't allow that, for people to see the dramatic differences that it makes when a parent is empowered to help their child.
And the therapy is, you see it in the child because of the being held and manipulated, for lack of a better
Absolutely.
term,
Yes.
and loved by the parent.
I'll give you a quick example. We had a child years ago that was born with just a brain stem. She was referred to hospice because they didn't think she'd live. She lived. Hospice wasn't sure what to do. They sent her to us. She wasn't eating. She couldn't see. She wasn't moving much. We went in, PT, OT, speech, developmental, vision. At 3 years old, this child was walking with a walker, naming her colors and letters, making jokes. When she turned 3 years old, her parents framed for us her MRI images. And I have permission to tell this story, and I have a really hard time not getting emotional about it. No matter how many times I've told it, I've shown her MRI at conferences. She did not have a normal brain MRI at 3, but there were slivers, like crescents, of where she had brain tissue that had grown because of intervention. Her mother is now a developmental specialist with us because she believed so strongly in what happened with her daughter that she wanted to work for us. And she hasn't had a raise. That child is now, I think she's 16. I think she turned 16 this year.
Oh my goodness.
So, I mean, that's the kind of, and that's not rare. I mean, would you agree? We see that all the time.
Well, tell us the Sheri Mills story here. We'll introduce her by telephone in a moment.
Well, I think Sheri Mills does a great job at telling her story, but and so we should let her. But Sandy and I both worked with her and her beautiful daughter, and she has been we've had parents, their kids are out of our system for years, and they are showing up at community town halls and writing letters and making calls because they know what Birth to 3 did for their child, and they don't want any other parent who is faced with the stress and trauma of having a high-risk child to not have our support. So I would let Sheri tell her story of her daughter because she does it beautifully.
Sheri, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
And there's a picture of you and your daughter on our screen right now, by the way.
Oh, good. Well, as Nicole said, I'm first and foremost a mother. I have 2 children. My youngest has Prader-Willi syndrome. It's a rare genetic disorder. And as it's already been stated, the children that come to birth to 3 often have a spectrum of different help that they need, and obviously the goal is to have them graduate out and not need any more care. Children like Lyra, my daughter, need a lot of care, though, and the reason why birth to 3 was so important to us, first of all, birth to 3 is the first resources that most parents get coming out of the NICU, which is what our experience was. But my daughter was very fragile and had a lot of equipment, a feeding tube and oxygen and things like that going to appointments was not really something that we were prepared to do with her coming out of the NICU. So having families like ours and the support of birth to 3 who were willing to come into our home and be a part of our lives really meant so much to us. And as Nicole said, we spent a lot of time with a therapist with birth to 3, and Lyra needed a lot of care, so we had the gamut of therapists. I often joke that we were a revolving door, and my neighbors were wondering what all these cars were coming and going in our driveway. But they became like family to us because they spent the most time with us in a week. And so our kids need therapists like birth to 3. And also it was said here that the resources that they give us as parents and just listening to us is invaluable. Lyra is now 6.5, and we've been in private therapy for 3.5 years after birth to 3. And I don't have that same one-on-one relationship where a therapist is asking me how I'm doing and what I need. The things that birth to 3 gives parents that private therapy does not.
Delegate Michael Hornby, also the owner of this radio station. Mike, how did this all fall through the cracks? I know you haven't been a delegate for 20 years, but still.
Yeah, well, I first heard about this probably about a year ago during session. We heard some rumblings, but I think the birth to 3 they call them volunteers. They
practically are.
They have really brought this to our attention really early before the session. So I think there are. Delegate Pritt and myself are working to bring this to the Health Committee. I would hope somebody like Delegate Mike Height would get himself involved ASAP and get the answers that we need, because we think it's, birth to 3 has a $38 million line item in the budget. So it's not always about the money. It's about making sure we're taking care of people. So it could be just getting with the agency and figuring out why. Kind of like the IDD waiver issue that we talk about, that Mike talks about. So, but we're going to, Elliot and I are going to make this a priority this session.
Very good. I was Senator Jason Barrett sent me a text asking what the reimbursement rates are in our bordering states. I think you'd mentioned you have lost people to bordering states, correct?
We have, and every state does things a little differently. So I know in Virginia, it depends. Different counties in Virginia do things differently. I know in Loudoun County, I believe early intervention, you are an employee. So the rates are going to look differently because you're getting benefits. Mm-hmm. We personally have seen the largest exodus of therapists to the school systems in neighboring states. So not necessarily to early intervention agencies. Would you say that's fair?
Yes.
And I don't know about you might know more about reimbursement in other states.
I know Maryland. Every county runs its own program, and in Washington County, which but they run theirs through the school system, like Frederick County.
A close comparison for us is, I know in the past, has been Indiana. The last time we increased our rates, it was based off Indiana's model, and our state paired with them to sort of look at things. Mm-hmm. And I know 2 years ago, they just had a rate increase, but I don't know those figures off the top of my head.
And your caseload has gone up over the last 22 years,
Yeah,
correct?
we're serving over 13% of infants and toddlers in West Virginia, so over 7,000 children. And a lot of that is, a lot of those babies are born substance abuse, so they have multiple medical concerns. And so we're seeing more and more children. A lot of those children have not been identified as Medicaid eligible, and that creates a problem for funding because West Virginia Medicaid is a large source of our funding. And so we're seeing more kids, but obviously with the same budget since for our rates. So that creates an upside down problem for us of how to do the same job or a harder job, more intense job with fewer funds or the same funds.
Your independent contractors, are you overseen by somebody who oversees everybody that does independent contracting in the state?
I mean, every region has a representative that's kind of our director of our region. Mm-hmm. So we are informally supervised, but not really, because we all are direct contractors individually.
The state does, though, create quality like assurance checks. Our documentation is pulled, billing records are verified. There is oversight, if that's what you're asking. And then there also is training from the state. We are required to have specialized training and certain amount of training and certain hours every year. Our state office works very hard to make sure that we are resourced with things to make sure we can do our job well for the citizens of West Virginia.
Are you mostly state funded or federally funded? Are there some tie-ins there?
More state Medicaid than federal Medicaid.
Okay. So you don't get mileage reimbursement at this time, and you can't bill for the office work that you do.
Or travel.
And that is because of the way you're reimbursed? So part of the solution to this couldn't be, well, turn in your mileage and that'll help you a little bit. That can't be part of the solution?
No. Medical providers can only bill for face-to-face time with patients. And so because we're funded through Medicaid, we can't charge for time that we're not with a family.
Can you write off your mileage as a business expense since you are independent contracting?
Yes.
Can you write off the office expenses as
Correct.
well?
Yes, we can.
Would you lose? Obviously you'd lose that if you could get reimbursement for it. Then.
Well,
Correct.
you also have to be profitable to be able to write those off.
No,
Right? So if you're breaking even, you can't really write those off. You're not getting credits for those. So
Correct.
Therein lies the problem of being an independent contractor. But I understand why they're independent contractors. It's because some of you all work 20 hours a week, 10 hours a week,
50 hours a week.
50 hours a week.
And some work too.
When the state
But some work too. So
Yeah.
that's a good point. We have some counties where a speech language pathologist might work for this county school system and see one child after school a week.
Okay.
So there's a wide variety of who works for us and how much they work.
So when the state gives 5% raises, for instance, Mike, the Department of Health, does it automatically bump up the independent contractor
No.
base by 5%?
So all the employees within birth to 3 that actually work for the state, the administrators, they all get the 5%. But the subcontractors or the independent contractors do not apply because they're not state employees. So that's where we've got to talk to agency heads and agencies to say, everybody got a 5%. You need to build this into your budget so that we can increase these reimbursement rates. And at this stage, after 22 years, it's going to be a large number, but we have to probably raise it about 100% to be practical and to be actually in line with everything else.
I think something else that's important to note, we've talked a lot about retention. We haven't talked a lot about recruiting. I'm 48 years old and I'm the youngest physical therapist in our region. At some point, we need fresh blood. Our jobs are very physical. They're very demanding. We would love to train young and new therapists and mentor them. And I do some lecturing at WVU's PT school in the pediatric department. There's interest in our jobs. But physical therapy school, occupational therapy school, speech language pathology school is expensive. And those students can't afford to work for us because they won't be able to pay their student loans. And in competing settings, hospitals, clinics, they are offered benefits, but they're also offered student loan reimbursement. And at the end of the day, working for us, they'd make a third of what they could make in those settings. So
Doing the exact same kind of thing.
exactly. Right? And so we're having a hard time recruiting fresh talent, which is important. We care about this program. We're ranked number 2 nationally for objective outcomes. We're one of 2 states in the country who have met our federal requirements under IDEA for more than 10 years. We love that reputation. We care about it and we want to keep it, but we obviously need replacements eventually.
When was the last time you recruited successfully a new therapist out of school?
Out of school, I
can't-
can't tell you that I've ever recruited anybody right out of school.
If somebody's listening right now, and this kind of fits their lifestyle, where you can work for a few hours because of things that they're doing at home, what step would they take?
So there's not a hiring process per se where you have to apply for a job. Any licensed therapist in West Virginia who passes a federal background check and goes through the steps of taking orientation classes and understanding early intervention can enroll in our program. And there could hypothetically be as many therapists in one discipline as want to be. We don't have that problem.
There
But
was a time that we did.
We
though.
did.
I mean, there was
There-
a time that there were like 25 OTs for Berkeley and Jefferson County, and now we're at 5.
Yikes.
And do we have a backlog of children that are on a wait list?
I-
In
to-
some-
15 seconds.
In
by the
some
way.
counties, in some regions, we do. There's at least one region that's got like 200 kids on a wait list for intake.
Sheri, thank you for joining us by phone.
Thank you for having me.
And I wish the both of you the best, Sandy and Nicole, for getting your
Thank you.
reimbursement rates.
thanks for giving a
hiked.
voice to our children. They need it.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming in. West Virginia Birth to 3. We're back with more right after these. Financial Phil will join us next.